I never thought house sitting could lead to anything more than a quiet weekend of binge watching TV shows and eating way too much takeout. But, well, that's exactly what happened. Turns out, sometimes the most unexpected things happen when you're just minding your own business in someone else's living room. So here's how it went down. My best friend Mark had this huge 1920s craftsman style house in a really nice part of town. He was heading off on some last-minute business trip and asked me to watch his place. No big deal, right? I mean, I've house sat before, but usually for like a day or two tops. This time, it was a full 5 days, and the house was way bigger than anything I was used to. It was kind of a dream to have all that space, but also totally intimidating because it wasn't mine. I felt like I had to be on my best behavior, but mostly, I was just looking forward to a quiet break. The first couple of days were exactly what I expected. I'd wake up, make some coffee in his fancy kitchen, put on some music, and just relax. No distractions, no obligations. It was kind of blissful. But then, on the third night, things took a turn. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard this soft creak near the front door. At first, I thought maybe Mark's cat, Charlie, was trying to sneak out or something. But then the door swung open, and there he was, the neighbor. I'd seen him a few times before, just around the neighborhood, but we'd never really talked. He lived next door in this charming little bungalow that looked like it belonged in some indie movie, all ivy and twinkly lights. He was one of those guys who looked effortlessly cool, like he just rolled out of bed, but still looked put together. Kind of tall, sandy blonde hair that always looked a bit tousled, and these sharp green eyes that made it hard to look away. He didn't introduce himself or apologize for walking in, which threw me off completely. Instead, he just gave me this half smile and said, "Hey, I figured I'd check in. Mark left the door unlocked, right?" I blinked, totally caught off guard. Yeah, I guess. But you're just walking in?" He shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I live next door. Thought I'd see how the place was holding up. You okay?" It was weird, but I wasn't mad. More like curious and a little thrown. Who just lets themselves into someone else's house? And why this guy? Specifically, we ended up sitting on the couch, talking for hours. It was one of those conversations that just flows naturally. You know, the kind where you forget about time and place. We talked about Mark, about the neighborhood, about music, and somehow, I felt more comfortable with this guy than with anyone I had met in a while. But even as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here. Like maybe this wasn't just neighborly concern, and honestly, I was kind of hoping it wasn't. That night was just the beginning. And I had no idea how much that unexpected visit was going to change everything. After that night, I kept wondering about him, about the neighbor who felt like he belonged in Mark's house even before I did. His name was Jamie, which he'd mentioned casually while we were talking. Like, it was no big deal that he'd just waltzed into someone else's place and made himself at home. I guess maybe it was partly because he lived right next door, but still, that kind of boldness wasn't something I was used to. The next day, I found myself looking for reasons to be outside when Jamie was around. I don't know why. I guess I was trying to make sense of whatever weird little spark or tension had landed between us. When I stepped out onto the porch to grab the newspaper, I saw him in his front yard, trimming some bushes with the kind of casual ease that made me want to join him, even though I had zero gardening skills. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He looked up and gave me that same easy smile. "Morning," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Got any plans today, Mr. House Sitter?" I shrugged, scratching the back of my neck. "Not really. Just hanging out, I guess. Watching some shows, maybe." Jamie nodded, like he was mentally comparing that to his own plans. "If you want some company, I'm just next door. I could use a break from pruning." I hesitated for a second, then found myself saying, "Sure, why not?" Turns out, Jamie was way more interesting than the quiet weekend I'd originally planned. He was the kind of guy who knew his neighborhood backwards and forwards, could tell you which coffee shop had the best croissants, or which park was best for late afternoon sun. He had this dry, kind of sarcastic sense of humor that caught me off guard, but I liked it. We ended up sitting on his porch with beers he'd grabbed from the fridge, talking about everything from movies to music to the weird quirks of our neighborhood. It wasn't just easy, it was comfortable in a way I hadn't felt in a while. Like I could be myself without trying too hard. And honestly, after some frustrating dating experiences in the past, that felt like a breath of fresh air. Over the next couple of days, Jamie kept dropping by. Sometimes it was to borrow sugar or tools or just to check in and see how I was doing. Each visit was casual but didn't feel accidental. We'd laugh, share stories, and I started to realize I was looking forward to seeing him more than I expected. One afternoon, Jamie invited me over for dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just homemade pasta and a bottle of wine he insisted we open, even though it was only like 6 p.m. We ate on his tiny balcony, the city humming quietly below us, and talked about things that felt way too private for casual acquaintances. I told him about my job, my family, the stuff I usually kept to myself. He did the same, opening up about his own life, his dreams, and even some of the stuff that made him vulnerable. There was this moment, maybe halfway through the wine, when our conversation dipped into the kind of silence that doesn't feel awkward. I looked over at him, and the way the light caught his eyes made my chest tighten. "Do you ever think about how random stuff like this happens?" I asked, nodding toward the city skyline. Jamie smiled softly. "Like me walking into your life uninvited?" I laughed, though my heart was doing a weird dance. "Yeah, exactly like that." He leaned a little closer, his voice lower. Sometimes the best things come from the unexpected. I wanted to say more, wanted to tell him how much that night had changed everything for me, but I didn't. Instead, I just met his gaze and held it a little longer than usual. The air between us felt charged, but neither of us pushed. We just sat there, savoring the quiet. By the time I left, the sky was dark, and the city lights twinkled like they were in on some secret. I walked back to Mark's house feeling like I was somewhere new, like I had stepped into a story I didn't want to end. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Jamie. About his smile, his eyes, the way he seemed to see right through the walls I'd built around myself. I'd gone into this house-sitting gig expecting a boring few days, but instead, I'd found someone who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Jamie. "Coffee tomorrow?" I promise I won't just let myself in this time. I smiled, feeling something warm spread through me. It's a date. And just like that, the quiet weekend I'd planned turned into something I didn't want to let go. Something that felt like the beginning of whatever was next. Coffee with Jamie the next morning was exactly what I needed, even if I was a little nervous about calling it a date. We met at this tiny hole-in-the-wall cafe a few blocks away. The kind of place where the baristas know your order before you even say a word. Jamie was already there when I showed up, sitting at a corner table with a book in one hand and a cappuccino in the other. He gave me that same easy grin he'd flashed on night one, like nothing was complicated, even though I was definitely overthinking everything. We talked about the usual stuff at first. Work, favorite movies, the absurdity of trying to keep a plant alive. But as the conversation settled into a rhythm, I found myself opening up about more personal things, stuff I usually kept under wraps. I told him about some rough patches I had been through, the kind of stuff that made me feel vulnerable just saying out loud. And he listened. Like, really listened. No judgment, no interruption. Just this genuine attention that made me feel less alone. At one point, I caught him watching me, his eyes soft but curious. "You don't have to carry all that by yourself, you know," he said quietly. I wanted to argue, to say I was fine on my own, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. It surprised me how comforting it was to hear someone say that, how much I'd been craving it without realizing it. After coffee, we wandered around the neighborhood a bit like we were teenagers discovering a new place together. We stopped at a vinyl shop, and Jamie showed me some records he swore were hidden gems. He picked out an old jazz album and handed it to me with a grin. "Trust me, this one's a classic." Later, as we walked back toward Mark's place, I felt this strange mix of excitement and something else. Nervousness, maybe. It wasn't just about liking Jamie. It was about opening myself up again, about risking something I hadn't dared to risk in a long time. When we got back to the house, Jamie paused at the front door like he wasn't sure if he should say goodbye or something more. Then, without overthinking it, He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The touch was light but electric, and I swear my heart skipped a beat. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice low. "Me too," I whispered, feeling like the words were bigger than either of us. We stood there for a moment, caught in this quiet, charged space, before Jamie finally pulled back with a smile that was both teasing and serious. "I should probably head home before Mark comes back and finds out I've been invading his space," he joked. I laughed, but I didn't want him to go. Not yet. As the days went on, Jamie and I fell into this easy pattern. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies, and spent lazy Sunday afternoons exploring the city. There wasn't any rush or pressure, just two people who enjoyed each other's company more than they expected. But of course, nothing stays simple forever. One evening, about halfway through my stint at Mark's, Jamie and I were sitting on the couch in the living room, sharing a bottle of cheap wine and talking about childhood dreams. He told me he'd wanted to be a musician when he was younger, something he'd never really pursued. "I'm not sure why I stopped," he said, staring down into his glass. I reached out and took his hand, surprising both of us. "Maybe it's not too late." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. I realized I wanted to be the person who encouraged him, who believed in him the way he made me believe in something new. But then there was the hesitation, the unspoken question of what this all meant. Were we just two guys passing time until Mark got back? Or was there something real here, something worth risking? That night, as Jamie left and I closed the door behind him, I felt a mix of hope and fear swirling inside me. I wanted to believe in us, but I knew I'd have to take a leap to find out where this could go. And honestly, I was ready to jump. The next morning, I woke up with that familiar flutter in my chest, the kind that happens when everything feels like it's hanging on the edge of something important. Jamie's words about music and second chances kept spinning in my head, mixing with the quiet hum of Mark's house around me. I realized I hadn't stopped thinking about him since he left the night before, and honestly, it scared me a little. For a while, I'd been used to keeping my feelings locked down, wrapped tight in layers of logic and caution. But with Jamie, it was like those walls were starting to crumble, piece by piece, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the mess that might come with letting them fall. By mid-afternoon, I found myself pacing the living room, debating whether to text him or just wait it out. Part of me wanted to hear his voice, to know he was thinking about this too. The other part was terrified of sounding desperate or needy. Eventually, I settled on a simple message. "Hey, you around tonight?" His reply came almost instantly. "Yeah. Want to come over? I'm making dinner." That was all the invitation I needed. When I walked next door, Jamie had already pulled together a small spread. Nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad. But the way he'd lit candles and put on some soft music made it feel like a scene from a movie. He greeted me with that grin that always made my stomach do weird flips. "Glad you came," he said quietly. We ate, talking about everything and nothing. He told me more about his music dreams, about how fear and self-doubt had kept him from chasing them. I shared more about my own struggles, about how I'd gotten stuck in a rut, and almost missed out on what felt like a fresh start. After dinner, we moved to the couch, the wine bottle now empty on the coffee table. Jamie reached out and took my hand again, but this time there was a difference, a kind of purpose behind the touch. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice low. I swallowed, feeling my heart pounding. "Me too." The moment stretched, charged, and fragile. Then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, but it felt right, like the missing piece sliding into place. Jamie kissed me back, and suddenly, everything else faded away. The past, the fears, the quiet loneliness, all gone in that moment. When we finally pulled apart, we just stayed close, our foreheads touching. "I don't want this to be just a weekend thing," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Jamie smiled, a little shy but serious. "Neither do I." Over the next few days, things between us deepened. We spent as much time together as we could, sneaking quiet moments in the morning before work, sharing late-night talks that stretched until dawn, and discovering little things about each other that made us smile. But as much as I wanted to live in that bubble, reality was waiting. Mark's trip was almost over. and I knew the day would come when I had to leave the house and Jamie behind. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the city lights flicker, Jamie took my hand and looked at me with those intense green eyes. "What happens after Mark gets back?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't want to think about it, but I also knew we couldn't pretend this was just a temporary thing. "I want to figure it out," I said honestly. Jamie nodded, squeezing my hand. "Me too." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the question hanging between us. That night, as I lay in Mark's guest room, I realized that what started as a simple house-sitting gig had turned into something way more complicated and way more meaningful than I ever expected. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to take the risk. The day Mark was supposed to return arrived faster than I expected, and I woke up feeling this weird mix of excitement and dread. Part of me wanted to linger in this bubble Jamie and I had created, like time wasn't ticking away and reality didn't have to knock on the door. But the calendar didn't care about my feelings. I spent the morning tidying up Mark's place, trying to make it look like I hadn't been sprawled on the couch for days. The house was too big for me to feel comfortable, and with every creak of the floorboards, I was reminded that this wasn't really my world. Jamie texted around noon, "Coffee before you hand the keys back?" and I agreed immediately. We met at the same cafe where we'd had our first proper talk, and it felt a little surreal to be there knowing Mark might be home soon, that my time in this bubble was almost over. We talked like usual, but there was an unspoken tension under the surface. I could tell Jamie was trying to keep things light, and I was doing the same. Neither of us wanted to say the thing that was hovering in the air. What happens now? After coffee, we walked together toward Mark's house, the silence growing heavier with every step. Standing on the porch, I looked over at Jamie and saw the same mix of hope and worry reflected in his eyes. "Hey," he said, breaking the silence. "No matter what happens, I'm really glad I met you." "Me too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The door opened just then, and Mark stepped inside, smiling and chatting about his trip. For a moment, I felt like a guest in a story that wasn't mine, like I was watching from the sidelines as my time in that house, and with Jamie, slipped away. Later that day, Jamie and I said a quiet goodbye on the sidewalk outside Mark's place. It was awkward, like neither of us knew how to close the chapter without leaving something unsaid, but then Jamie surprised me. He reached out, took my hand, and pulled me close. "Let's not let this end," he whispered. I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, let's not." We spent the next few weeks trying to figure it out, making plans, stealing moments between work and life, learning how to be more than just neighbors with something vague and fragile between us. It wasn't always easy. There were misunderstandings, moments of doubt, and the challenge of building something real when the foundation had started as a casual house-sitting gig and a neighbor's uninvited visit. But every time I looked at Jamie, I saw possibility. I saw someone willing to take a chance on me, and suddenly I felt brave enough to take a chance on him. One night, months after Mark's trip had ended, Jamie and I sat on his balcony, the city lights shimmering below us. He pulled me into a hug, and as I rested my head on his shoulder, I knew that house-sitting had been more than just a favor for a friend. It was the start of something unexpected, something real, something worth holding on to. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. After that night on Jamie's balcony, things started to feel more real. Like not just the easy laughs and stolen moments, but something solid underneath all the excitement and hope. We still had our share of awkwardness, especially when it came to defining what we were, but it felt like we were slowly figuring things out together. There was one evening about a month in that really stuck with me. I'd had a rough day at work, nothing major, just the usual grind that leaves you tired and kind of empty. Jamie somehow knew right away. Before I even said a word, he showed up at my door with takeout from my favorite sushi spot and a bottle of this cheap red wine he'd claimed was better than it sounds. We sat on my tiny balcony, the city sprawling beneath us, and just talked. He listened while I vented about deadlines and coworkers and the constant pressure to be on all the time. And when I was done, he looked at me with those steady green eyes and said, "You don't have to carry all that alone. Not with me." It was one of those moments where something inside you shifts, where the walls you thought were permanent suddenly feel a little less solid. I leaned into him and it felt like coming home, A couple of weeks later, we had our first fight. Nothing dramatic, just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I'd made plans with some friends and forgot to tell Jamie until the last minute, and he took it personally. We snapped at each other, the tension crackling like static in the air. After a few hours of silence, Jamie showed up at my place with that same mischievous grin and a peace offering. 2 tickets to a concert we'd both been dying to see. "Consider this an official apology," he said. That night, when the music started and we were standing shoulder to shoulder in the crowd, everything felt lighter. The fight didn't matter anymore. What mattered was us. Messy, real, and somehow perfect in all the imperfections. We kept building like that, sharing playlists, cooking meals, mostly Jamie cooking while I supervised, taking long walks through the city's quieter streets. Every day felt like a new discovery, not just of each other, but of what it meant to be close to someone again. One lazy Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves sprawled on the couch, the windows open to a gentle breeze. Jamie was flipping through an old photo album he kept on a shelf. I watched as his fingers traced the pictures, some of family, some from trips, some of him back when he looked a little different, a little younger. "Do you ever think about the future?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked up, thoughtful. "Yeah, I do. Scary, but exciting." I nodded. "I'm scared too, but with you, it doesn't feel impossible." He smiled, leaning over to kiss my forehead. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time." Months after that house-sitting weekend, Jamie and I were no longer just neighbors or casual acquaintances. We'd carved out a space for us, a messy, beautiful space where we could be ourselves. Looking back, it's wild how one unexpected visit, one moment of boldness from a neighbor who just let himself in, could change everything. But that's life, right? Full of surprises, risks, and sometimes love when you least expect it. And honestly, I'm grateful every day that I took that leap. There was this moment, about 6 months in, that I keep replaying in my head. It wasn't anything huge or movie-worthy, just a quiet evening that somehow felt like a turning point. Jamie and I were sprawled on the couch, a mess of blankets and pillows around us, binge-watching some old show neither of us really liked but couldn't stop watching anyway. The kind of lazy night that feels like it could stretch on forever. I remember looking over at him, the way the soft glow from the TV caught the curve of his smile, and feeling this intense, almost overwhelming sense of belonging. Like, this was home, not a place or an address, but a person. I'd never thought I'd feel that so clearly, especially not starting from something as random as house-sitting for a friend. Out of nowhere, Jamie reached over and took my hand, fingers intertwining with mine. It was such a small gesture, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. I squeezed his hand back, heart pounding, and he just gave me that quiet, reassuring smile he has, the one that says everything without words. "I love you," he said then, so softly I almost didn't catch it. I turned to face him, my mouth dry. "I love you too," I said, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Saying it out loud changed something, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in this deep, steady hum beneath everything else. It was like the foundation we'd been building finally settled into place. After that, things started to get real in ways I hadn't anticipated. Jamie and I began talking about what us meant beyond just weekends and stolen moments. We made plans for the future, tentative and half-formed, but filled with this quiet hope. We talked about moving in together, about the small apartment Jamie had been eyeing downtown. I'd never imagined living with someone else before. Not like this, anyway. But with him, it felt like the right kind of scary and exciting all at once. There were still challenges, of course. Balancing work, friends, and our own space wasn't always easy. Sometimes we clashed over little things, who forgot to do the dishes or what movie to watch on Friday night, but those moments never lasted long. We learned to talk through the tough stuff instead of letting it fester. One time, Jamie surprised me by organizing a dinner for just the two of us at this tiny Italian place he'd discovered. Candlelight, soft music, the kind of atmosphere that makes you want to lean in close and forget the world exists. Halfway through the meal, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver ring. "I know it's early," he said, nervously twisting it between his fingers. "But I want you to have this. No pressure, just something to remind you that I'm here, that I'm all in. I stared at him, my heart swelling in a way I didn't expect. I took the ring, slid it onto my finger, and smiled. I'm all in too. It wasn't a proposal, at least not yet, but it was a promise. A quiet vow that, whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. Sometimes I still think back to that first night he let himself into Mark's house, completely uninvited, and laugh. Who knew a neighbor walking in would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? Life has this funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Now, when I look at Jamie, his messy hair, that crooked grin, the way he always knows how to make me laugh even on my worst days, I can't imagine my life without him. This whole thing started as a simple favor, a few days of house sitting, but it became so much more. It became love. Real, messy, imperfect, and utterly worth it love. And yeah, I'm grateful every single day. The thing about love is, it doesn't always come with grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments, the everyday routines, the little things that build up into something real. Jamie and I found that out the hard way, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. A few months after that dinner where he slipped the ring onto my finger, we finally moved in together. It was this modest apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Boxes everywhere, the scent of fresh paint, and the way the sunlight filtered in through the windows. It felt like the start of a new chapter. I remember the first morning there, waking up tangled in his arms, the world outside still half asleep. We didn't say much, just this peaceful understanding that we were in it together. No matter what came next, sometimes I catch myself thinking about that weekend I spent house sitting for Mark, the quiet house, the unexpected visit from my neighbor, the way a simple act of boldness changed everything. It's crazy how one small moment, one choice, can ripple out into your whole life. Jamie is still the same guy the first met that night. The effortless smile, the jokes that catch me off guard, the way he knows how to calm me down just by being near. But now we're more than neighbors or friends or something in between. We're partners. And that means everything. We don't have it all figured out. Life isn't perfect, and we have our ups and downs like anyone else. But there's this steady current beneath it all, the feeling that no matter what, we've got each other's backs. And honestly, that's more than enough. Some nights, when the city quiets down and the only sound is the hum of the streetlights outside, I look over at Jamie sleeping beside me and feel this warmth that's hard to put into words. It's comfort and hope and a little bit of awe that out of all the randomness in the world, this is what found me. So yeah, I was just house sitting, but it turned out to be the start of everything. And honestly, I'm grateful every day that I took that chance, opened my door, and let him in.